The dust cloud rose like a tornado behind Karen's red BMW as she tore through Jake's pasture at 60 miles per hour, scattering his prize cattle like bowling pins. What she didn't know was that Jake had been planning his revenge for weeks, and tomorrow, when she took her usual shortcut through his property, she'd meet his newest additions to the ranch, 1,200 pounds of pure territorial fury named Thunder and Lightning. Karen thought she owned the road. She was about to learn that some roads have. Jake Morrison stood at his kitchen window, watching the morning sun paint the Montana horizon in shades of gold and amber. At 52, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. He'd found the peace that had eluded him for decades in the city. The 1,500-acre ranch had been his sanctuary for 3 years, now until Karen Whitmore decided to treat his private property like her personal highway. The distant rumble of an engine shattered the morning quiet. Jake's jaw tightened as he recognized the sound. A high-performance BMW engine being pushed to its limits. Through the kitchen window, he watched a red streak tear across his eastern pasture, leaving a cloud of dust and scattered cattle in its wake. "Every damn morning," he muttered, setting his coffee down harder than necessary. His prized Angus cattle scattered as the red BMW roared past, their peaceful grazing interrupted by the screaming engine. Jake had invested everything he had into this ranch, and those cattle represented his future. Each animal was worth thousands of dollars, and the stress from Karen's daily racing routine was affecting their weight gain and breeding cycles. Jake grabbed his keys and headed for his pickup truck. Enough was enough. He caught up with Karen as she slowed near the main road, her BMW gleaming despite the dust it had just kicked up. Jake pulled alongside her and rolled down his window, his face set in hard lines. "Karen, we need to talk." Karen Whitmore, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair, lowered her window with obvious annoyance. Her designer sunglasses reflected Jake's frustrated face back at him. "What now, cowboy? I'm late for my yoga class. You're trespassing on my property every single day. That's not a public road you're tearing through, that's my pasture." Karen's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Oh please, that little dirt path has been used by everyone in the valley for years. Just because you bought some land doesn't mean you own the world. I own that land, and I have the deed to prove it. You're endangering my livestock and destroying my property. Your cows will be fine. They need the exercise anyway." Karen revved her engine impatiently. "Look, I pay more in taxes in 1 year than your little hobby farm makes in 5. I have important places to be, unlike some people who play dress-up cowboy." Jake's knuckles whitened as he gripped his steering wheel. "This isn't a hobby, Karen. This is my livelihood. Those animals you're scaring are worth more than your car." "Doubtful." Karen's voice dripped with condescension. "And even if that were true, which it's not, I have every right to use that road. It's been a community thoroughfare for decades. Show me the easement papers, then." Karen's pause lasted a beat too long. "I don't need to show you anything. My family has been using that route since before you even knew Montana existed." "That's what I thought." Jake's voice turned deadly quiet. "You're trespassing, Karen. Every single day. And I'm asking you nicely to stop. And I'm telling you nicely to mind your own business." Karen shifted into drive. "That shortcut saves me 20 minutes getting to town. I'm not changing my routine because some wannabe rancher is having a tantrum. Karen, I'm warning you, you're warning me." Karen's voice pitched higher with indignation. "Do you know who I am? My husband is the bank president. One phone call from me, and your little mortgage gets called in early. So maybe you should think twice before threatening me." The threat hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd leveraged everything to buy this ranch, and the bank held most of his debt. Karen's husband, Richard Whitmore, controlled the biggest bank in 3 counties. "I'm not threatening you," Jake said, fighting to keep his voice level. "I'm asking you to respect my property. And I'm telling you that your property isn't as private as you think it is." Karen's smile was razor-sharp. "See you tomorrow morning, cowboy. Try not to let your cows get too excited." The BMW roared away, leaving Jake choking on dust and fury. That evening, Jake sat on his porch with his neighbor and closest friend, Tom Bradley. Tom was a 4th-generation rancher who'd seen every kind of land dispute the valley could produce. "She threatened to call in my loan," Jake said, staring out at his cattle as they grazed in the fading light. Tom shook his graying head. "Karen Whitmore's been running roughshod over this valley for years. Her husband's money makes her think she's untouchable. Maybe she is. Nobody's untouchable, Jake. The law's still the law, even for bankers' wives. The sheriff's been useless. I've called 3 times about the trespassing. Deputy Collins just takes notes and says he'll look into it." "Collins goes to the same country club as the Whitmores," Tom said dryly. "What did you expect?"
Jake
pulled out his phone and showed Tom a video he'd recorded that morning. Karen's BMW tore through the frame at dangerous speed, sending his cattle fleeing in panic. "Look at this. She's doing at least 60 through my pasture. If one of those animals breaks a leg or gets hit by her car, I'm finished." Tom studied the video, his weathered face grim. "That's reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and trespassing all rolled into one. Any decent lawyer would have a field day with this. Can't afford a lawyer. And even if I could, who am I going to sue? The bank president's wife. There's got to be another way." Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching his cattle settle down for the night. "Actually, Tom, I think there might be." The next morning, Jake made a phone call to his old friend Marcus Webb, who ran the largest cattle operation in the state. Marcus owed Jake a favor from their Army days, and Jake was ready to collect. "I need to borrow 2 of your bulls," Jake said without preamble when Marcus answered. "Bulls? What kind of bulls?" "The kind that don't like strangers in their territory." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Jake, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal. I just want to introduce some new livestock to my property. Specifically, to the eastern pasture where someone's been trespassing." "How new?" "Thunder and lightning arrived yesterday evening," Jake said, watching the 2 massive Brahman bulls through his binoculars. Each animal weighed over 1,200 pounds and stood nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder. They were magnificent, territorial, and absolutely fearless. "Those boys don't play nice with strangers," Marcus warned. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Jake had spent the previous evening strategically placing the bulls in the eastern pasture, right along Karen's usual route. He'd also installed motion-activated cameras at key points along the path. Whatever happened next, he'd have it documented. At 7:15 a.m., right on schedule, Jake heard the distant roar of Karen's BMW. He positioned himself on a small hill overlooking the pasture, binoculars in hand, his phone ready to record. The red car crested the small rise at its usual breakneck speed. Karen, no doubt, expecting another clear run through Jake's property. But as she rounded the bend near the old oak tree, she suddenly hit the brakes. Through his binoculars, Jake could see her face change from casual arrogance to shock, then to something approaching fear. Thunder and lightning stood directly in the path, their massive bulk blocking the route completely. The bulls had noticed the approaching car and were now facing it head-on, their heads lowered in the universal bovine gesture of territorial aggression. Karen laid on her horn, the sharp sound echoing across the valley. The bulls didn't move. If anything, they seemed more agitated by the noise. Jake watched as Karen rolled down her window and shouted something at the animals, probably expecting them to move like her usual victims. Thunder snorted and pawed the ground, sending up small clouds of dust. Karen tried to edge around them, but the bulls shifted to block her path. Lightning, the larger of the two, took several steps toward the car, his massive head swaying back and forth. Through his binoculars, Jake could see Karen's growing panic. She was trapped between the bulls and a steep embankment, with no room to turn around. Her only options were to back up the way she came, adding 20 minutes to her precious commuter. Somehow get past 1,200 pounds of territorial beef. Karen chose option 3. She laid on the horn again and gunned the engine, apparently thinking she could intimidate the bulls into moving. That was her first mistake. Thunder's response was immediate and spectacular. The massive bull charged forward, his head lowered, aiming directly for the front of Karen's BMW. At the last second, he veered slightly, his horn catching the side mirror and tearing it clean off the car. Karen's scream echoed across the valley. Lightning, not to be outdone, approached from the passenger side and delivered a powerful headbutt to the rear door, leaving a significant dent in the pristine red paint. Jake watched through his binoculars as Karen frantically tried to back up, her car weaving dangerously as she struggled to escape. But Thunder and Lightning were having none of it. They flanked the BMW like prophecy. Sheriff David Morrison was a tall, lean man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of human nature's darker side. He'd been keeping the peace in Clearwater Valley for over 20 years, and he knew every family feud, boundary dispute, and grudge that simmered beneath the surface of their small community. "Morning, Jake," he said, his voice carrying the weight of official business. "David," Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "What brings you out this way?" "I think you know." The sheriff's gaze swept over the eastern pasture where Thunder and Lightning grazed peacefully. "Got a call about an incident involving your livestock and a certain red BMW." Jake crossed his arms. "Those bulls are on my property, David. Last I checked, it wasn't illegal to own cattle. It is if you're using them to assault vehicles. I didn't assault anything. Karen Whitmore was trespassing on my land, and my bulls defended their territory. It's what bulls do." Sheriff Morrison pulled out his notebook, a gesture Jake recognized as both professional and performative. "Karen says you deliberately placed aggressive animals on her usual route to cause damage to her vehicle. Her usual route crosses my private property without permission. That's called trespassing." Jake's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I've called your office 3 times about it. Deputy Collins took my statements and promised to follow up. When nothing happened, I took steps to protect my property, by creating a dangerous situation, by exercising my rights as a landowner." Jake stepped closer, his jaw set. "David, that woman has been terrorizing my cattle for months. She drives through my pasture at 60 miles per hour, scaring animals worth thousands of dollars. Yesterday, she threatened to have her husband call in my loan if I didn't shut up about it." The sheriff's expression didn't change, but Jake caught a flicker of something doubt, maybe, or recognition. "That's a serious accusation, Jake. I have it recorded. Jake pulled out his phone and played the audio from yesterday's confrontation. Karen's voice, cold and threatening, filled the morning air. My husband is the bank president. One phone call from me, and your little mortgage gets called in early. Sheriff Morrison listened to the entire exchange, his face growing darker with each word. When it finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This doesn't change the fact that your bulls damaged her vehicle, he said finally. My bulls were on my property. She was trespassing. If someone breaks into your house and gets bitten by your dog, do you arrest the dog? It's not that simple, Jake. It's exactly that simple. Jake's voice rose slightly. Karen Whitmore thinks she owns this valley because her husband has money. She's been bullying people for years, and everyone just takes it because they're afraid of the bank. Well, I'm not afraid. You should be, came a sharp voice from behind them. Both men turned to see Karen Whitmore climbing out of a silver Mercedes, apparently her backup vehicle. She was dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Jake's monthly mortgage payment, and her face was flushed with anger. Karen, Sheriff Morrison said, with obvious reluctance. I told you I'd handle this. And I told you I want that man arrested. Karen pointed at Jake with a perfectly manicured finger. Those beasts attacked my car. They could have killed me. Those beasts are bulls, Karen. You were on their territory. I was on a public road. No, Jake said firmly. You were on my property, and you know it. Karen's eyes flashed with fury. You arrogant little man. Do you have any idea what you've done? My car needs $8,000 in repairs. The insurance company is calling it an animal attack and trying to deny coverage. Maybe you should have thought about that before trespassing. I wasn't trespassing. Karen's voice climbed to near hysteria. That path has been used by residents for decades. It's a community right-of-way. Then, show me the easement documentation, Jake said calmly. Show me one piece of paper that gives you the legal right to cross my land. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sheriff Morrison watched the exchange with growing interest. I don't, That's not. The community understanding doesn't require paperwork. Actually, it does. Came a new voice. All three turned to see Tom Bradley approaching, carrying a thick folder. Jake's neighbor looked grim but determined. Tom, Karen said, her voice suddenly wary. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. Tom opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. See, after Jake told me about this situation, I got curious. I remembered my grandfather talking about some kind of road dispute back in the 1960s. So I went down to the county clerk's office and did some research. He handed the documents to Sheriff Morrison. Turns out there was an easement agreement for that route. Signed in 1947, it allowed Valley residents to use the path to get to the old grain elevator. Karen's face lit up with triumph. See, I told you. But, Tom continued, holding up a finger, the easement was contingent on the grain elevator remaining in operation. When the elevator was torn down in 1963, the easement was legally dissolved. The county clerk confirmed it this morning. The documents rustled in the sheriff's hands as he read through them. Karen's face went pale. Furthermore, Tom said, pulling out another sheet. The original easement specifically restricted usage to agricultural vehicles traveling at safe speeds for livestock areas. It was never intended for passenger vehicles. And definitely not for high-speed transit. Sheriff Morrison looked up from the papers. These appear to be legitimate county documents. They are, Tom confirmed. I have certified copies. The path Karen's been using hasn't been a legal right-of-way for over 60 years. Karen snatched the papers from the sheriff's hands, her eyes scanning desperately. This is ridiculous. Everyone uses that road. Everyone's been trespassing, Jake said quietly. The difference is, everyone else had the decency to stop when I asked them to. I can't believe this, Karen muttered, still reading. This has to be a mistake. No mistake, Tom said. I also found records of your family's property purchases over the years. Your grandfather bought his land in 1952, 5 years after the easement was created. He would have known about the grain elevator requirement. My grandfather's been dead for 20 years, but the records aren't. Sheriff Morrison handed the documents back to Tom. These look legitimate to me. I'll have the county attorney review them, but if they're accurate, Mrs. Whitmore, you've been trespassing on Mr. Morrison's property. Karen's face cycled through several emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally, calculation. Even if that's true, she said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge, it doesn't give him the right to sick his animals on me. I could have been killed. You put yourself in danger by trespassing, Jake replied. Sheriff, I want those bulls destroyed. They're dangerous animals. Now hold on, Sheriff Morrison said, raising his hands. Nobody's destroying any animals. The bulls were on private property, defending their territory. That's natural behavior. Natural behavior. Karen's voice rose to a shriek. They attacked my car. Your car was in their space, Tom said mildly. Bulls are territorial. Everyone in cattle country knows that. I don't care about cattle country customs. Karen spun to face the sheriff. I want that man arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. Karen, the bulls aren't weapons, they're livestock. They're 1,200-pound monsters that he deliberately placed in my path. They're on his property, Sheriff Morrison said patiently. He has every right to graze his cattle wherever he wants on his own land. Jake watched Karen's face as the reality of the situation sank in. She was used to getting her way through intimidation and threats, but the law was clear. She had no legal right to cross his property, and he had every right to keep livestock on his own land. This isn't over, Karen said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. My husband owns half the businesses in this valley. We'll destroy you. Are you threatening me again? Jake asked calmly. I'm promising you. Sheriff Morrison stepped between them. That's enough, Karen. I suggest you go home and cool off. I suggest you do your job and arrest this man. Mrs. Whitmore, the sheriff said, his voice taking on an official tone. Based on what I've seen here today, you're the one who's been breaking the law. Trespassing is a misdemeanor. If you continue to use Mr. Morrison's property without permission, I'll have to cite you. Karen's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. I'm very serious. And if you continue to threaten Mr. Morrison, I'll have to consider charges of harassment and intimidation. You can single quotes my husband. This is ridiculous. Your husband doesn't run the sheriff's department, Karen, I do. For the first time since Jake had known her, Karen Whitmore was speechless. She stood there, opening and closing her mouth, her face flushed with impotent rage. I want to file a complaint, she said finally, against both of them. Conspiracy to commit assault, destruction of property, harassment. You can file any complaint you want, Sheriff Morrison said warily. But I have to tell you, based on the evidence, you're the one who's been breaking the law here. Karen turned on her heel and stalked back to her Mercedes, her designer heels clicking angrily on the gravel. She slammed the car door with enough force to make the entire vehicle. The Clearwater Valley Bank occupied the most prominent corner in downtown, its brick facade and marble columns designed to project stability and permanence. Jake had walked past it hundreds of times, but never with the sick feeling that currently churned in his stomach. At exactly 9 a.m., he pushed through the heavy glass doors and approached the reception desk. The young woman behind it looked up with a professional smile that faltered slightly when she saw his expression. "Jake Morrison, to see Richard Whitmore," he said. "Of course, he's expecting you." Richard Whitmore's office was a monument to success and intimidation. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and a wall of diplomas and awards created an atmosphere of unassailable authority. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat a man who looked every inch the small-town power broker's silver hair, expensive suit, and eyes that had learned to see people as either assets or liabilities. "Mr. Morrison," Richard said, without standing. "Please, sit down." Jake remained standing. "I prefer to stand for what I expect will be a short conversation. Suit yourself." Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "My wife tells me you've been having some disagreements about property usage. Your wife has been trespassing on my land for months. When I asked her to stop, she threatened to have you call in my loan. Did she?" Richard's tone was mild, almost amused. Karen can be passionate about her routines. She can be a lot of things. Legal isn't one of them. Richard's smile was thin and cold. "Legal is a flexible concept, Mr. Morrison, especially when it comes to community relationships and long-standing agreements. There is no long-standing agreement. The easement expired in 1963. Ah yes, Tom Bradley's little research project. Very thorough of him." Richard opened a folder on his desk. "Unfortunately, Mr. Morrison, legal technicalities are less important than practical realities." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that your mortgage payment is due in 15 days. It also means that the balloon payment on your equipment loan comes due in 6 months. Approximately $430,000, if my records are correct." Jake's blood turned to ice. "I've never missed a payment." "No, you haven't. You've been a model customer. However, recent events have raised some concerns about your judgment and your ability to maintain stable operations." "What events?" Richard pulled out a thick file and opened it. "Reports of aggressive livestock on your property. A sheriff's investigation into assault charges. Complaints from valued community members about harassment and intimidation. That's complete garbage, and you know it." "I know what's in my files, Mr. Morrison, and what's in my files suggests that your ranch may be becoming a liability to the community and to this bank." Jake stepped closer to the desk. "Are you calling my loan?" "I'm expressing concern about your operations. Concern that might lead to adjustments in our lending relationship." "Cut the banker double talk, Richard. Are you threatening me?" Richard's mask of civility slipped slightly. "I'm informing you that actions have consequences. My wife's car suffered $8,000 in damage on your property. Someone needs to pay for that. Your wife was trespassing. She has no legal claim for damages. Legal claims aren't the only kind that matter in a small town, Mr. Morrison." Richard closed the file with a sharp snap. "Karen wants her car repaired and she wants an apology. She also wants assurance that she can use her traditional route to town without harassment. Her traditional route crosses my private property illegally. Then perhaps you should consider granting an easement. Pro bono, of course, as a gesture of good faith to the community." Jake stared at the banker in disbelief. "You want me to give your wife legal permission to race through my pasture every day, pay for the damage to her car, and apologize for defending my own property? I want you to be reasonable, to consider your position carefully. My position is clear. I own my land, and I'll decide who crosses it." Richard's eyes hardened. "Your land is mortgaged to this bank, Mr. Morrison. Your equipment is financed through this bank. Your operating capital comes from credit lines with this bank. I'd be very careful about taking such an absolutist position. Are you calling my loans or not? That depends entirely on your willingness to resolve this situation amicably." Jake understood the game now. Richard couldn't simply call in his loans without cause. That would be illegal and could result in a lawsuit. But he could make Jake's life extremely difficult through delays, additional requirements, and bureaucratic harassment. It was extortion, dressed up in banking terminology. "You want me to cave to your wife's demands, or you'll find ways to make my loans difficult to maintain. I want you to be a good neighbor and a responsible community member. And if I refuse," Richard's smile was predatory, "then you'll discover that banking relationships, like marriages, require constant attention and care. Neglect them, and they can become ... complicated." Jake stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the man who held his financial future in his hands. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd dreamed of, could be destroyed by this petty tyrant and his entitled wife. "I need time to think about it," Jake said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need, but don't take too long. Karen is quite upset about her car, and upset wives have a way of making everyone's life more difficult." Jake turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped him at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Morrison, I'd strongly recommend removing those bulls from the eastern pasture. For everyone's safety, of course." Jake walked out of the bank, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. The morning sun seemed too bright. The cheerful bustle of Main Street too normal for a world where his dreams were being held hostage by a banker's wounded pride. He sat in his truck for several minutes, staring at nothing, before his phone rang. Tom Bradley's name appeared on the screen. "Jake, how did it go?" "About as well as expected. Richard wants me to pay for Karen's car, apologize, and give her legal permission to use my property as her personal speedway. And if you don't, then my loans become complicated." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Jake, there might be another way. I'm listening. Meet me at the diner in 20 minutes. And bring your phone, the one with all those videos of Karen's trespassing." Jake found Tom in a back booth at Murphy's Diner, but he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was a woman Jake didn't recognize, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was used to getting answers. "Jake Morrison, meet Sarah Chen," Tom said as Jake slid into the booth. "Sarah's an investigative reporter with the state newspaper. She's been looking into small-town corruption for a series she's writing." Sarah extended her hand. "Tom tells me you're having some trouble with the local power structure. You could say that. I'd like to hear about it. And I'd especially like to see any documentation you might have of threats or intimidation by local officials." Jake looked at Tom questioningly. His neighbor nodded encouragingly. "What exactly are you looking for?" Jake asked. "Stories about abuse of power. Public officials or prominent citizens using their positions to bully ordinary people. Banks calling in loans for personal reasons. Sheriffs ignoring complaints because of political pressure." Sarah pulled out a digital recorder. "The kind of corruption that thrives in small towns where everyone thinks nobody's watching." Jake thought about Richard's threats. Karen's arrogance, and the months of harassment he'd endured. Then he pulled out his phone. "I've got recordings of Karen Whitmore threatening to have her husband call in my loans. Video of her trespassing on my property daily. And I just came from a meeting where her husband essentially tried to extort me into paying for her car damage and giving her an easement." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Can you prove the extortion?" "I recorded the conversation." Jake showed her his phone. "I started recording when I realized what he was doing." "You recorded a bank president attempting to coerce a customer." "I recorded a man threatening my livelihood because his wife didn't like the consequences of breaking the law." Sarah looked at Tom. "This is exactly what I've been looking for. A clear case of financial intimidation by someone in a position of power." "There's more," Tom said. "Show her the county documents about the easement." Jake spread out the papers Tom had obtained from the county clerk. Sarah photographed each page with her phone, asking detailed questions about the timeline and Karen's claims. "This is a solid story," Sarah said finally. "Entitled banker's wife illegally uses private property for months, threatens property owner when confronted, then husband uses his position to try to force a settlement. It's got everything: abuse of power, financial intimidation, and clear documentation." "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now, I write the story. It'll run in Sunday's edition, statewide circulation. I'll also send copies to the State Banking Commission and the Attorney General's office." "Won't that just make things worse for me?" Sarah shook her head. "Richard Whitmore's power comes from operating in the shadows. Once this is public, he can't retaliate without proving everything I've written. Banking commissioners take a very dim view of loan officers who use their position for personal vendettas. What about Karen? What about her? She's been breaking the law for months. The sheriff has it documented, and now the whole state will know about it.